Percent of the time, I have no idea what I'm talking about.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
It's not. It
Gets the people going.
You're now listening to Diagnonsense.
Look at all this damage!
With Justin Pendergrass and Kurt Honak.
You are a sad, strange little man.
Then we would just be idiots saying nonsense.
Do you want to know? So I had this super crazy reaction to the banana oatmeal that was in the microwave yesterday, and me and Kurt were talking about it. Like, I can't do artificial banana, but that's the only oatmeal we had left. So I microwaved it, and I took it out of the microwave, and like instant like gag, like could not do it, dumped it out. It was like that's visceral of a reaction. And me and Kurt were talking about like what like trauma, and I'm using that word very loosey-goosey.
What trauma?
But like what trauma was associated with artificial banana oatmeal? And then I realized this morning that when I was 6, I had like a really bad case of strep throat, and the antibiotics that they made me take were artificial banana, and I was miserable for like a week. It was like the worst I'd ever been sick up to that point.
That's the
I
proof.
blocked it out.
Dang.
But the banana oatmeal triggered it.
Your parents hurt you.
They did. They did.
And I know they're listening right now, so I just wanted to point that out. They really hurt you.
Yeah, with the banana oatmeal.
Your mom, when we were at the golf tournament, she was just like, you can say stuff that we did bad. We're not perfect. I love that. It was so funny. Hey, thank you guys for tuning into Diagnonsense. I'm your host, Justin Pendergrass. I'm here with Kurt Honak. How you doing, Kurt?
Doing good.
Hey, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yeah, we've got Josh Fryfogle with us that runs the People's Paper,
Yeah, Josh Fryfogle.
amongst many things.
Awesome. We're going to skip the soft open, and we're just going to keep rolling. Or, I'm sorry, what is that? Housekeeping.
I don't know when this is releasing, to be honest. It's like 3 weeks from now. It's so far in the future. I don't even know what we have coming up.
Well, it's
we have Redemption and My Voice coming back. So
there we go.
I mean,
you lose your voice.
Welcome to September. We're in the future.
Yeah, we're so far in the future right now.
That's rad. I'm about it.
After
Okay.
the fair. After the fair.
Yeah, the fair's over. It was just as bad as it always is.
And it rained.
It rained.
It did rain. Okay, safe bet that it did rain all weekend, or all week.
Is this like a reverse
before
jinx?
this.
Yeah.
I'm
reverse jinx.
really trying to call down a reverse jinx because I have an event that I'd really like it to be sunny for 2 weekends from now, and the forecast is saying that it is not going to be sunny and it's going to pour rain instead.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I have every like friend and family member that I care about coming up to the state, and it is just supposed to dump rain the entire time everyone is here.
So at this point, you're married. How's married life?
It's either going really good or really bad.
Well, you're here, so.
It's probably going really good. Yeah, I'm here. This is, I mean, if this
She hasn't killed you yet.
Man, if I show up dead in between now and 3 weeks from now when this releases, it's going to look really bad. This is going to be like one of those lost episodes that comes out like 5 years down the line, and it's on like a true crime podcast and they're like referencing it. It's like,
Tell us how
the
to.
secret.
there's like really
Go ahead,
spooky like piano music playing behind it. Like,
I was gonna say, tell us how to shut off the automatic posting so that we can stop it from coming.
I'm going to like
Well, he's
leave.
got to upload it
I'm
for
going to
that.
leave it in a lockbox. Like if I
my
die, break in event of me
Okay.
dying.
All right.
Please unbury on this day 20 years from now. It's a time capsule. Oh my gosh. Hey, Kurt, so will you introduce the topic that we're going to talk about today?
Well, I thought we could talk about a couple different things. And when we have guests on, we usually let them drive it a little bit and whatever's on the forefront of their mind. I know one of the things I did want to talk about, though, is just mental health care. Obviously, this show is about mental health. And recently I had a representative from one of our senators' offices talking to me about what I think to draft like a half page, what is the most important thing for mental health in youth. So I think that that's something that I'm focusing on, that I've kind of written about. I said, I got more than half a page to say it. And they said, okay, do 20 things and we'll try to pick out, what we think is most relevant. So
Yeah, this is a lot more than half a page.
yes, it
Yeah.
is.
You could have
But-
probably double-sided this.
I could have.
I went through it yesterday. Maybe okay. So, Josh, like, what do you do in like 2 minutes or less? Like, Summits, where are you from? What do you do?
That's a good question.
I live in Wasilla. I grew up in Mississippi. I moved here in 2003.
Okay.
My company I started was called Make a Scene. It's a double entendre. And the idea being that we have to take control of our marketing as musicians, because I'm a musician. So that's where it started, was the idea that we should promote ourselves and not wait for corporate approval to achieve success locally, that we can build culture and a scene, so to speak, here locally just by cooperating together. So my company is built on that premise, and in the last 15 or so years, we've grown from a small monthly publication. Now we've got 2 or 3 publications, depending on how you look at it. We've got the radio station, 95.5 The Pass, and we also do a lot of events with music, and I run a lot of sound and book a lot of local events. So it's all about freedom of expression and encouraging and promoting local people to use their own freedom of expression instead of a media company that creates content and feeds it out to a demographic that they're targeting. It's all very organic, and the goal is to have an accurate reflection of the community, not necessarily a bias-driven media entity.
Yeah, that's rad. It's a little metal.
Yeah,
Make
it's
a
pretty
scene.
metal.
Yeah, it's pretty metal. I like it. I've known Josh for a couple years. I actually, I don't know if you remember this, but I was like 15 years old. Make a Scene was still doing their weekly or every Friday night. I think you guys were doing shows. And I was 15 years old, and you were like, well, we just had some rappers come through. Because I called you, I got some information about what you were doing, and I was like, well, I'm looking to get into this.
Right.
And you introduced me to Devin Shaw.
Right.
So from there, that actually was a big piece in my career where it spiraled me into being where I'm at now. You know, I got some light mentorship from Devin Shaw, and then from there I've progressed and I've moved into my own thing. But I mean, that conversation, it was a 5-minute conversation, but it was really, I remembered that. I've remembered that a long time. And it was really cool to just see where you were then and the level of like care and coordination and love you were showing to artists and where you are now. And it's just really awesome because now you guys do like music in the park.
Yep.
And, all these other local events. I think that you've ran sound at a
Friday
couple
Flings, Colony Days. I do a lot in Palmer.
Yeah. No, and as a member of the community who's in the music industry, I appreciate the level of care and support that you give into that. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate hearing it. It's definitely from my heart. I mean, my motivation is no one says, hey, let's go to Wasilla and make a music scene because they're in it for the money. You know, it has to come from the heart.
That's
And,
accurate.
And that's really why I think I was just talking with Norm Hamlet. We did a short video interview for the radio station that we put online. And Norm Hamlet played with Merle Haggard for 49 years. He was the band leader. And it was amazing to hear all that he had to say about music and to hear the concerns because, not everyone is a superstar. Not everyone gets to tour with a superstar the whole world over and have that perspective. And we're talking about music. And it was very interesting because by the time we got to the end, we were just getting warmed up and we turned off the tape and everyone relaxed and we started ranting about what's wrong with the music industry. And to do that with someone who has such a bird's eye view of the big picture and to hear and to see his approval when I'm saying something critical of the industry and his approval of it. And talking to Mario, his partner, Mario Carboni, they play together, and they're both very, very accomplished professionals, especially Norm, obviously. But when you talk about the music industry, it's inherently corrupt. Like the nature of the way it's been built from the start has been about corruption. And I'm not saying corruption in the sense of necessarily political corruption. I'm saying deviation from the purpose, right? So the music industry, and this is really where my heart got when I was learning in my early years of being a musician how to succeed as a musician. I'm a reader, so I inevitably came to an understanding about what was wrong with the industry because it's obviously corrupt.
Yeah.
You just have to look a little bit. It's not like you have to be a conspiracy theorist to see that the radio, they passed the payola laws for a reason. And most people don't realize that they passed these laws in 1978. But all of American pop culture was determined by radio up until 1978. And that was all a fraud. Everything about what we heard on the radio, all of our top 10 hits, everything has been affected by payola, where instead of the culture determining what the culture likes, which that's what we think of when we think of famous music, it was all affected artificially by record companies paying radio stations to play certain music and to not play other music. So this is corruption that existed from the beginning, but there was no law to stop it.
Wow.
So the whole industry, like decades and decades of music industry history, it should have an asterisk by it in the record book, because it's no different than, Lance Armstrong's always going to have an asterisk because it was discovered that he used performance-enhancing drugs. Well, that's the equivalent in the music industry is payola. For decades, they were paying big money to artificially inflate the fame and fortune of certain artists, which obviously displaced the people who should have been there if it was culturally determined organically by the people. So that's, once you wrap your head around the fact that the music industry is by design corrupt, then you have to take a step back and say, why do I love music at all? Well, my love was never really about the industry. The industry, I came to understand it because I loved music. So why do I love music? Because culturally, human beings love music. It's part of our human experience.
Yeah, it's a universal language.
Right. So to be able to accurately manifest your own culture locally is the antidote to so many of society's problems. So many of our problems, like we have a problem with diet, right? But there's golden arches in every city, in every town, everywhere you go, all over the world.
I feel convicted. I did eat at Wendy's last night.
Well, we're all stuck in the loop, but the cultural dissemination of our food, our music, all coming down from people rather than up from the people. So that's really what Make a Scene is about, my company.
Yeah.
And that's the driving philosophy that informs it. So I was talking to Norm Hamlet about this. What happened is Merle Haggard and Buck Owens, really Buck Owens, but then Merle Haggard, and then all of the other famous Bakersfield, California musicians, they started their own scene. And they were kind of pushed out by Nashville. Nashville didn't want them because they were honky-tonk and it was seen as hokey or whatever, not classy enough for Nashville at the time. So they pushed them out and they started their own scene. So there was a power in that they were separated from the mainstream. The normies.
Well, they were indie country.
They were truly indie country back then. And then you had Willie Nelson do something very similar in Austin when they pushed him out. So the Austin, Texas music scene, the Bakersfield music scene, both of those, and Sub Pop out of Seattle, all three of those are examples of music scenes being born by virtue of the fact that they were being ignored by the mainstream. So there's real power in being the outsider when it comes to art and culture because you're the underdog, right? So when you try to affect the culture, you're coming at it from a more authentic perspective, and your neighbors and community recognize that. And that's to me the power of the local music scene. It's much bigger than music. It's about everything, connecting with people.
We can't see Kurt because it's an audio podcast, but as soon as we started talking about normies and being the outsider, Kurt's just been licking his lips this entire time.
No,
Well, I mean, I think that that can be said the same about the topic that Kurt wanted to address with you about mental health and how we have to retake control of our mental health, because he says that all the time.
Yeah, and before we get started on that, I just want to say that watching your journey, Josh, with the music and what you've had to say about politics has inspired me, to be more involved in civics, because and I don't know which came first. I don't know if it was civic involvement and then music, or music helped you discover more about civics, but that
music is the core of everything.
I mean, that has inspired, it has inspired me to think more critically, and also to see that there's actually meaningful impact that can be made, that doesn't have to be these huge steps. Like, there's small steps you can take that are meaningful in your civic engagement. So it's
election day when we're recording this today. By the way, so we've all been talking about this.
It is,
Isaac. It's September. Election day was a month ago.
Yes, it was. Hopefully the right person won. And whoever you want to be the right person, you can make up your mind on that on your own. So,
but yeah, no, I mean, that does have impact on when we talk about, what's being that power disparity between, what a small group of people with a lot of power have to say about whatever subject it is, whether it be music, food, medicine, that are disseminating information that, may be in their best interest, but not in the general public's best interest or general culture or whatever demographic that looks like.
I saw a graphic recently, to your point, where they showed all of the different products that we consume regularly, food products here in America, and they list the ingredients, and then they show the parallel food product in Europe where those same ingredients aren't allowed.
Yeah.
And it was this long list. It had like Cool Ranch Doritos is a completely different formula in Europe, because the European Union says that these chemicals cause harm. So aren't we lucky that we live somewhere where they don't?
Yeah. Communists, give me my Cool Ranch Doritos.
That is fascinating, because the menu over there for the Golden Arch is completely different.
Yeah.
The menu over there is a completely different standard.
And the ingredients themselves
everything
are governed differently.
That's so interesting, because I think
it's a testament to just how foolish it is to trust government guidance as if it's truth.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? Because it's so arbitrary.
There's Kurt licking his lips again.
We truly do live in a society, Kurt.
Well, and I think, part of it is from an American ethnocentric perspective, right? Was like,
big
I'm
word,
an American
ethnocentric.
Well, so I'm an American looking at my own culture inside of America, right? Is like, part of that's like, well, people are like, well, if like I can decide what I put in my body. We can sell what we want to sell, and it's a free market, and let people decide. But I'm challenged because I think there's a violation of, what would you say, intellectual integrity? You've talked about this too, Josh, where there's a violation of the truth in that, where we have these products, and I do believe that people should be able to decide what they put in their bodies or decide to use. However, I think that there's like a lot of misinformation by these entities, let's say, that where they twist the truth and even to the degree that the science of the research firms that are conducting studies on our food and medicine is being influenced, and so intellectually honest, is one of the things that I've seen you talk about a lot. And it's like, I do believe people should be able to pick, but I don't believe that the research that's being put out there is intellectually honest, and I don't think that the conversations and the marketing that's being had is intellectually honest. So, like, as an American, it's like, yes, I want to have my right to use, if I need a certain medication that might be you know, it might be dependency causing, but maybe let's say that's the best course of action for my health. The challenge is that we have people that are pushing research and science and marketing for these things that if I'm an uninformed consumer, like, and I'm just trusting what is being said, I could really hurt myself, you know. Right. And that's a really broad topic, but I guess it brings me back to when I think for mental health for youth, it's like what would be useful for me in my teen years that I could change or you know positively impact for youth today, because, and I think that is a civic you know journey, right? Because you're trying to look out for the common good. So one of the things that I was thinking when I was drafting this letter is just that, and I haven't given you a copy of it because I just like started to, you know, I just like finished it the other day, and I know you haven't had a chance to read it, but one of these things that I wanted to respond to the senators on was pharmaceuticals. Recently, there was a huge serotonin meta-analysis that was done that was saying there is no link between serotonin and depression. So we've had decades of, you know, this, everybody's everybody's chemically imbalanced, and this is what we talked about last week as well. So if you want more information about that, we go in more depth about it last episode. Yeah, and one of the things, the interesting topics that I've seen you talk about a little bit is like the divine right to rule, right? So when we, as a country, we decided, you know, religious freedom, we want to have the freedom to choose our religion or choose our spiritual destiny, to, you know, kind of like divine sovereignty kind of thing. And the responsibility, freedom and responsibility to me are like directly correlated with each other, because when I look at our generation, I think we've kind of got when we look at the spiritual leaders or like who's leading the mission of our country, I think we've got kind of an unelected clergy going on with the pharmaceutical corporations, psychiatry, and this kind of paradigm of what people should believe about their bodies, what is, we'll say, you know, well, I mean, to me, it starts with the DSM, right? We've got a book saying what constitutes mental health, what constitutes being mentally healthy, and what doesn't, you know? Yep. And so part of my recommendation to the senator was, is going to be, getting rid of the biological model. So when we think biological model, right, and I'm interested to hear your feedback on this, but when we think of the biological model, right, you think just like, oh, biological. So you have your body and you're treating it from the paradigm of like your physical health is, that's how you're treating the mental health. But the problem is that, so like, let me read off this. So doing a PubMed search, right? This is what they say the biological model is. It says the biological model posits that mental disorders are brain diseases and emphasizes pharmacological treatment to target presumed biological abnormalities. A biologically focused approach to science, policy, and practice has dominated the American healthcare system for more than 3 decades. So essentially that these are you know, medical pathologies that have solid objective science, but
so in other words, there is no perception problem. It's all just chemistry, and there's nothing anyone could do as far as changing their mind state consciously to change their outcome.
Well, right. That's one of the things that's inherently saying.
Right.
But the other challenge I have with that too is that with the you know, the biological model is that it's like, is that biological theory as of, you know, 2022, or is that biological theory as of 1930?
Yeah, because biology is different now, right?
Well, and
everything's not what it was.
Science changes, right? And we learn more, right? You know, I mean, you go back to some of the things that, from my perspective, some of the things that's being practiced are 1930s era ideas about biology. I just don't see with like, for example, the chemical imbalance theory. It's like we were hung up on decades for the idea that serotonin was causing depression. And it's like, well, there's a lot of different neurotransmitters and nutritional vitamins in the body that you need. There's a lot of different components. How did we decide for decades that one neurotransmitter was responsible for happiness or depression?
It's the whole if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
Right. They had very limited understanding of what they were dealing with. And I think if you look back at medical history is like, if you're critically looking at medical history, it's an embarrassment. I'm not saying that I'm against medicine.
Right.
I'm just saying that when you look back at the things that they used to believe, when you look at what scientists have believed in the past, like, people forget that it was the scientific community in the 30s that was positing scientific racism as a biological fact. And it was that led to the rise of anti-Semitism, of Hitler's regime.
Right.
Everyone forgets that Hitler based his entire schema on this newfound belief that the science community was writing about, scientific racism, where they had these ideas about different races being different levels of evolution. So instead of looking at the different races being just different races, but equal as far as individuality, they were exploring this concept that there must be a superior and inferior dynamic going on, which that in and of itself was very misguided, obviously, but look at the damage it caused. I mean, Hitler couldn't have justified what he did if he couldn't have pointed to decades of scientific, academic research to back it up. He was able to get an advanced nation to buy into total BS because the scientific community affirmed it. They didn't say go out and kill the Jews, but they did affirm the idea that there were superior and inferior races, and therefore it was the responsibility of the superior to govern the inferior.
Yeah.
And that's the whole. So when you look at the Nazi ethos, they weren't conservative Christians. They were mostly totalitarian-minded, agnostic, science-believing, first world. You got to think Germany was a highly advanced nation. This is not some weird backwoods North Korea situation where it's all a sham. They were very highly advanced people, one of the most advanced nations on earth as far as technology and science. But look at the folly of their blind support of academic research. When any honest look at science, real science is self-critical. That's the whole point. It should never be complete. The science is never settled. That is an absurd idea. That's dogmatic. That's theology. If you want to talk about things you can't question, then you need to get into religion where you want to do that. That's what religion is for.
Well,
but science is not supposed to be absolutes.
Right. Well, and it changes so fast. I mean, if you want an example of how quickly we've learned, especially when it comes to the medical field, like 200 years ago, we were still like bleeding people out because we thought that we needed to get bad blood out of their system. And that came from a belief, 200, 300 years before that about the four fluids that are in your body.
The humors.
And there's black bile and there's yellow bile and then there's red bile and you have you're dying of the Black Plague? Well, you have a bile imbalance. So we need to
bleed you out.
Bleed you 3 quarts dry.
How does that feel?
Right. I mean, in
I feel a little lightheaded.
In 1863, which to me is forever ago, but in the grand scheme of civilization,
it was yesterday.
And we were sawing people's legs off in the Civil War and the Crimean War because we didn't have a better solution than your leg's infected. That sucks. Your leg's gone now. and we're
And
talking.
that's just hoping that the infection doesn't spread anymore,
right.
or get reinfected,
So-
because then you're like losing your hip. Like, I mean, there's
That's-
people getting it all the way up.
That's 150, give or take, years ago. And now we're talking about, when we're talking about the serotonin theory of depression, how serotonin levels are ultimately responsible for depression. This is an idea and a study that has, even compared to that, I mean, really, Kurt, you said, I mean, that kind of starts in the 1930s, and then we only truly have an understanding of it probably around the 1960s, 1970s. Like,
Well,
so
I've kind of thrown in, the genetic theory with
Sure.
so I threw in a lot of theories
but
together.
my point is like
Yeah.
that whole biological
Right.
model, that's
Yeah,
maybe something 50, 60 years in the making.
Yeah.
And that is a third of the time that it took from us to getting sawing people's legs off to where we are now. And that's even less time than everything moves so fast.
Right.
Were people depressed before 1930?
No, actually. The world was in black and
just
white. Depression
interested
only
in
came
what
about
happened
after
before.
the world switched from black and white to color around the 1960s.
That's true.
Which
So-
happened right in the middle of filming Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
Like they were almost
Right. That's why that movie is so revolutionary, is because they actually
Right.
figured out how to, like, they changed the entire world. Everyone was able to see color because of that movie.
at that
So-
moment that Dorothy opens the door. That's when it happened.
Right.
Because it was still
It
black
was
and white
completely on
inside.
accident,
Yeah.
too. Like, it's
Wow.
wild.
I'm glad I got to know that.
Yeah.
It's
History
important.
facts.
Everyone was colorblind before that.
Well, to support the biological thing in a way that I've never heard. This is something that irks me because I was a very dysfunctional youth, like extremely dysfunctional.
Sure, as we all.
Speak for yourself. My only problem was the banana cream oatmeal.
well, I had some serious deviations from healthy behavior from the time I was probably 15 until my first son was born. And so I was around 20, 21 when I finally had that awakening moment where I had to change my mentality. So I spent several years risking things that I didn't even know I was risking. And I dealt with, at one point, they put me on Zoloft, and they turned me into a Zoloft zombie. But I was on Librium. They put me on several different drugs for different reasons. And I was diagnosed with clinical depression, right? And there's no doubt I was sad a lot. And actually, I was all over the place. I was, sometimes I was very, I felt so free. But then other times I felt so damn depressed, And so they tell me it's something chemical, and I'm like, well, could it all? And even then I thought, well, maybe it's chemical, but, my life was really upended. Divorce happened to my parents. Everything fell apart. Every plan I had growing up as a young person was taken away from me mentally. It all just in a matter of months, because my family dissolved and fell into this dysfunctional, broken home scenario that I didn't see coming. Because of that, that's why I thought I was depressed. But I was being told, no, there's something chemical, which implies that it was purely coincidental that my whole life is upended, and now I'm sad. I mean, think about how silly that is. Of course I'm sad.
You've been given some pretty unwinnable circumstances,
Right. Everything that you make plans your whole life as a kid. You see the path you're on. I remember who I wanted to be and who I thought I was going to be as an adult, and how that all seemed achievable until my foundation was taken away and my family fell apart. And I watched how that dysfunctional divorce process just made it harder and harder for my parents to cooperate, right? And so, but they're telling me, no, the problem is just purely coincidental. You happen to have this biological. So even then I thought, well, that really doesn't make any sense, because I know why I'm sad. And so they're attempting to take away from me my motivations for my own feelings. and assign those feelings to something completely arbitrary and separate from the reality of my experience. So I say the biological model, though, this supports it, because what really helped me more than anything else, and this is going to sound weird, maybe not, but I started working physically with my uncle, doing very physical labor. And I discovered that it wasn't just the sense of accomplishment from doing the work, which I did achieve a sense of accomplishment, but that came later. That was not a motivation for me. But what I discovered is through doing physical labor, hard work, I felt better. Now, anyone can tell you that people get addicted to working out because it feels good. It's not just, I mean, yes, you might go into working out because you want to look better, but you're more immediately going to notice after a couple of weeks of conditioning your body to doing physical things, you feel better after. And then you start to get addicted to this process, and it's like it's hard to get started, but once you get started, you are so glad you did it. So what happened was my uncle gave me a job. And it was hardest work I've ever done in my life. Physically, the most we were installing flooring, so it was full body, really hard stuff, tile, wood, it was so hard. And I think that is, if they wanted to avoid over medicating, especially young men, but also anyone, well, you got to consider, if you just look at it from an evolutionary science, right? Perspective. If you just accept evolution as a scientific premise, that implies that for millions and millions of years, humanity has had to physically achieve just to survive. So organically, biologically, hard labor is as much a part of our biological need as food. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So when we tell these kids, here, take this pill and go sit in front of the screen and don't do anything, right? And here, we're going to put you in a box all day at school, right? And we're going to limit your physical activity and focus on your education. Well, there's a part of our biology that's telling us that if you want to survive, you should be physically engaged. You should be challenging, just like you challenge your mind to learn by studying things. It's the mental heavy lifting, right? We should be doing that for these young people who are experiencing dysfunction and depression, because it's an immediate trigger for serotonin, for endorphins. It makes you feel better.
Well, and I do think that there's definitely individuals that do have chemical imbalances or genetic dispositions to, like bipolar disorder. Certain people are born with bipolar disorder, and there's nothing that they can do about that. And for those individuals, maybe they do need some sort of mood stabilizer. But when you're looking at an individual and you're looking for, okay, so you're telling me that you are dealing with severe feelings of depression, and then you ask them, well, tell me a little bit about your life up until this point, and they tell you, well, my parents got divorced, I have no base, I've been homeless, I've had close family members that I've lost. That's when it seems obvious that you should start with, well, let's get you on a solid foundation first, and then let's see what else we need to do for you. Maybe you do have bipolar disorder. Maybe, some sort of medication would be good for you, but let's just, let's deal with some of the trauma that you've had in your life first before we go to that point. But I think, Kurt, what you're saying in that paper from what I read is, for the last however many years, our first response has been, regardless of your story, regardless of your trauma, whatever you're dealing with is a chemical imbalance. I like that, what you said, Josh, where it's like, man, it's just a great coincidence that you have a chemical balance and your life sucks. Yeah. Like, thank goodness.
Right.
So
yeah.
We have a fix.
Yeah.
Well, and for the work aspect of things, I learned so much from doing physical things that were demanding, that caused me to break a sweat, that made me sore the next day. And then at the end of the day, I would look, and we had this beautiful hardwood floor with this polish on it. And I realized not only did I physically feel better, but psychologically, I was starting to see that, yes, the plans I had for my life had been upended. They were very unlikely to play out how I had assumed they would for literally my whole life. But I could also see that through my own effort, I could do something to overcome that and change that outcome. And I think that's the problem, is they jump right to the drugs. I mean, sure, there's always going to be some people who literally are chemically affected in some way neurologically, and we have to help those people, and pharmaceuticals might be the way to do it. But we're giving these little kids drugs.
That's the first line of defense.
Right. Throwing these pills down their throat. And we're finding out over generations, like what was the first one that they started medicating? Ritalin.
Right.
Right? And now, do we still give Ritalin to kids? Is that still a thing?
I mean, as far as I know, I know when I was 15 and I started to take it, I got addicted to it because, I mean, it's like...
It's a meth.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it shares
It's the
mechanism
same thing
of,
that
of
Germans
action.
were using to like blitzkrieg through
Well,
France.
That's my thing, right? Is that, okay, so we're, they had something, I think I saw something called like Panzer chocolate where the tank commanders would have amphetamine laced chocolate. And I think Cocoa Puffs and Ritalin for breakfast. So we're giving, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, I just, I just, and I hear what you're saying, like Isaac, about like some people that might be like, but I think
a
it's
new meaning for cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
how Cocoa Puffs helped install the Third Reich's reign over Europe for 6 years.
That's a
Sorry,
great
you were
line.
about to say something poignant, Kurt. Sorry.
Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs is just a great line.
And well, I'm laughing because Cocoa Puffs was my favorite cereal as a kid.
If you watch
so
Triumph of the Will, the Cocoa Puffs mascot is actually
okay. But in all seriousness, right? Like I'm challenged because I think that like it's like there's been, to me, part of what I'm saying in this letter is there's been kind of a guild war with psychiatry. It's been it's been kind of in its own civil war, so to speak, like ideologically for decades. And I just feel like the things that are being like thrown out there, it's like I don't even know if I'm to the point personally where I would say I don't even know that there's evidence to suggest that any of those drugs are there's a placebo effect, right? So people can have placebo effect happen where we think that more people are this is working for more people than it actually is. Then there's the dependency. If you're dependent on a drug, if you start a drug and then you're dependent on it, if you come off of it, you're sick, which reinforces the placebo effect in your mind too, right? So you have all these mechanisms that are reinforcing the fact that these work when in reality they don't. And like when I think like moods, I mean, I was put on mood stabilizers, right? Like
well, it's just not, it's being misdiagnosed. I will agree with you that we have this thought that, these drugs are working for more people than they are. I don't think I'm quite to the point where I'm willing to just write off all pharmaceutical drugs as not working, because I do believe that there are individuals, and I think a much smaller percent of individuals than who we're prescribing to, but I do think that there are a number of individuals that do need some sort of medication to help them with, and we're using bipolar disorder as an example, but any number of things. Yeah, sure.
Well, that stuff, I mean, 1930, let's go back to that, right? Everything started progressively going up.
Right.
More people were diagnosed. More people had these issues. More people were in these situations where they were diagnosed with these things. And I'm interested in knowing, like, what took place that made that the new standard and pushed these people in this direction, and how is that actually altering their chemical, like, makeup, and if that's actually affecting their generation and their children.
That's an interesting study.
Right? Because what this is legitimately going into your being.
Mm-hmm.
It's messing with your brain.
So I would propose a theory that certain people conspired. So this is my conspiracy theory. So I would propose a theory that interested people during that time frame conspired to bring about the age of petrochemicals. And this was about tapping into resources that were limited and hard to get to, and eliminating resources from the economy that were easy to get to and that everyone could cultivate. So the whole pharmaceutical industry is really about petrochemicals. And the reason I say that is because you cannot patent a plant-based medicine because plants can't be patented. So when you introduce petrochemicals, you also see a coordinated effort from the media to move away from easily accessible hemp paper, and they shifted to trees, which are much harder to grow. They went to pulp paper for the newspapers. The newspapers that were propagandizing against hemp, and not for smoking, mind you. This is not talking about smoking flowers. I'm talking about an ancient cultivar crop called hemp that was grown all over the planet, and it was used for nearly everything. It was a ubiquitous plant. They removed it from the economy and replaced it with, instead of hemp rope, you had nylon rope made from petrochemicals. They replaced everything that they could that was easily accessible for the average people with something that could only be that could be controlled by corporations, and that the products could be patented so that there was perpetual profit. So when we're talking about petrochemicals and pharmaceuticals, we're talking about the same thing, right? And so you had a group of people who were highly invested in the petrochemical industry, and they took their money and their power and they used it to create a monopoly over that portion of the economy that did not exist before. If we had continued, if pharmaceuticals had continued being a development of plant medicine, then we would be dealing with plants rather than these unknown variables, but you couldn't patent it. So it's all about controlling the profit margin, right? So you look at all of our medicines. Aspirin is a plant, right? It's from a willow tree bark. It's just a plant. So that's why so many people can make aspirin. But these patented petrochemical-based pharmaceuticals that are causing so many problems and that we're talking about today, all of that is patented, highly profitable, which as soon as you attach a high profit need, now you've got corporate interest who cannot help but want to make money. Their only legal obligation, if you're a CEO or you're on a board for a corporation, your only legal obligation is to increase profit.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So we can't ignore that the profit motive behind it all is definitely driving the fact that we can't confront this easily. Kurt has spent years working on this issue, thinking about it, and why is it so damn hard to get this message out when so many people are obviously suffering from the chemicals themselves? It's hard because there are vested interest, very big money, that their whole system of profit is based on us not holding them accountable for. It's like the vaccines right now, which the mRNA shots, they are legally protected. If you do have a adverse reaction, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Right. And so aside from the efficacy of the pharmaceutical drugs, just looking at we'll say the ethics behind testing out, we've got, drugs being tested out on youth. Just the entire ethics of the way the thing is set up, that to me is the path of least resistance for making meaningful change in how we help the mental health of youth.
Tell me what I have to do, and I'll do it.
Well, I think we have to make an effort as a people to go away from what is called the biological model. The biological model, and this is the challenge, is language gets perverted, right? And I'm not talking about just any biological approach. I'm just talking about the way the biological model is right now, where we have these theoretical diseases and disorders being treated with how these drugs theoretically work on that will have a theoretically positive outcome on children, which is really like medical experimentation on children. So that to me is the most important thing.
It's tragic.
And most important way we can affect youth today is to move away from that.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to end this conversation. I think we could have gone for another hour or two. Josh, we'd love to have you to come back.
Sure.
And continue this. Maybe a little series on this conversation with you guys would be something that we can start discussing after that we go off air. Thank you guys for tuning in to Diagnonsense. I'm your host, Justin Pendergrass. I'm here with Kurt Honak. You got anything final words, Kurt?
I just appreciate Josh's time. Inspired. Part of my letter was inspired by things that you've had to say over the years. So,
thank you so much, Kurt.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, and you guys have a good one.
Yeah. I mean, are we not doing what we've been doing?
Well, I didn't really know how I wanted to end it after that, because there was not a good stopping point for this entire conversation. No.
It just kept jumping.
It really
leave this in.
And it could have just kept going.
Maybe I will leave it in, Kurt. You don't know.
I thought
you're right. I don't know.
I just want to go back to the Cocoa Puffs thing.
We
And
talked a
I can't
surprisingly large amount about Nazi Germany during this episode, and I don't know what
Nazis,
that
the
was all
music
about.
industry.
It's directly relative.
It's relative to the time. Yeah, it's relevant to the time.
Hitler was trying to take down the music industry. And
Using Coaco.